Today on CEO Barbecue, we're looking for silver and gold in Mexico, together with Pinnacle Silver and Gold. For a bullet point summary of this and all other CEO interviews, please go to resourcetalks.com and subscribe to our free weekly newsletter. The company you're about to hear from has paid us for the production of this interview, but this interview is still intended only for experienced speculators because this is venture capital and mining is a very risky industry where failure is the norm. All conversations are general and impersonal in nature, and they contain forward-looking statements. I'm not a licensed financial advisor, and my business sells content-producing services, which also makes me biased. So before continuing on, please talk to an independent investment advisor with a good long-term track record because your capital is at risk, and also visit setterplus.ca where you'll find the company's official filings. If you're not 100% sure you understand all the biases and the disclaimers that I just showed you, please go to the last section of this video and do not consume this content unless you fully understand and agree with everything said herein. That all said, this is not Pinnacle's first time on the barbecue, so if it is your first time here watching or listening, I'll link the previous interview in the description of this video. Please go and watch that if you haven't. That's where we did the smell tests and we talked about incentives and track record and everything. That's where I did a good part of the grilling. So unless you like missing out on a good barbecue, go and watch that. In a nutshell, though, the story of Pinnacle is one of, again, silver and gold, and more specifically, silver and gold in the Durango state of Mexico, where they're exploring a low sulfidation epithermal vein system with 3 historic mines along roughly 500 meters of strike, and surface mapping has now extended the mineralized structures to about 1.6 kilometers. There's also a historic 100 TPD planned on site that management says could be refurbished for a near-term restart once permits are in place. And Bob told me 2 to 3 years last time we spoke, so I'll ask about that later on. The earn-in structure under which Pinnacle is operating gives them 50% on commencement of production and a pathway to 100% subject to a 2% NSR on the back of that. Why Bob's back on the barbecue today is because field work in 2025 tied the underground channel sampling at Dos de Mayo and Pinos Cuates mines to new surface work and some 3D modeling as well. So again, interesting to touch upon those things as well in the conversation. Of course, that's not drilling, and you never know until you actually drill it. So I'll be asking more clarity on that later on. There's by the way, a secondary project that Pinnacle's got in Ontario, and although that's not the focus for them right now, I'll if we have the time toward the latter part of the conversation, I'll get an update on it as well. Pinnacle is listed as PIN, so that's PINN on the TSX Ventures Exchange, where the average 3-month volume is about 190,000 shares. The stock's 52-week high is 14.5 cents, and its 52-week low is 3 cents. With a market cap of just under 12 million Canadian dollars and just over 117 million shares outstanding, today this is a 10-cent stock with a 50 and a 200-day moving average at respectively 10.6 and 6.5 cents, which means the stock is now trading right at that 50-day MA. Normally, this is where I'd walk you through the company's updated financial statements, but Pinnacle's most recent financials are from the end of July, and they cover a quarter in which they weren't really drilling or making any major expenses at the time, and they also closed a financing for about $1.7 million after the effective date on the recent financing. So whatever's in there is not really going to be entirely representative. So I'll save you those details, but I would still like to direct you to setterplus.ca where you can find the company's official filings, including those financials, because further due diligence is required. Enough of me for now, though. It is finally time for me to shut up and Bob, let you do the talking. But first of all, thank you for being here today.
My pleasure, Antonio. It's always great to be back talking to you again.
The pleasure is all mine looking at that beautiful sweater that you're wearing there. So I am looking forward to an update and a conversation here. There's really plenty to talk about here, though, so I'll waste no time on pleasantries, and I'll start off with that financing that I just mentioned. $1.7 million is what you raised, half a warrant. How far is that going to carry you? What work are you buying for that money?
Well, we ended up there are 2 key payments that needed to come out of that. One that we were fully aware of at the time at the end of October, which was the property payment. That was 200,000 US, and which has been paid. And then the finder's fees on that as well. But And the other thing that we decided to pull the trigger on was the back taxes on the property, which I mean we knew going in, obviously, as part of our due diligence that the back taxes were owing, but in Mexico you can actually uh, engage in a program where you would pay 20% up front and then have a kind of an installment program where you pay monthly installments over 36 months, essentially, so 3 years to pay out the rest. And that was the intent. And we had applied to the government for that. But that whole application process was dragging out and dragging out. And then there were a couple of sort of external things that happened that just got me a little bit nervous about the whole tax situation in Mexico, and because that's all handled by the SAT, which is kind of their version of CRA, IRS, the financial ministry, and we just decided to just pay the taxes in their entirety rather than wait for them to respond as to whether or not they were going to approve that installment program. So we did that. We paid the taxes. We brought everything up to date, and that was again a little over 200,000 US. So that was a big chunk. So just those two things alone came to over 400,000 US, which translated into Canadian dollars, and you're looking at well over 500,000. So that was a big bite out of the financing, and on the balance, it's just been ongoing field work, and we did some metallurgy that we've announced as well, some preliminary metallurgical testing, and just standard. This has been a busy fall, busy time of the year, really, for marketing, all the conferences and such this time of year, so traveling and such. So with all of that, we knew that that financing was not going to take us through a drilling program, and so we will be looking to finance that coming up. But that kind of brings in a whole other set of issues that we can probably get into. Not so much on the financial side, but so yes, I mean that's roughly where the money's gone. Just as an aside, after the day after paying those back taxes on the concessions, the ministry came back to us and said that they had approved the installment program. So had we waited just a day, we would have been fine. We could have gotten away with entering into that program. But having paid the taxes now, everything's completely up to date, and I actually feel a little bit better, more comfortable about that anyway. So I think it was money well spent in the end.
So how much money do you have now then in total with everything?
Few hundred thousand, maybe 300, something like that.
Okay, so you're gonna have to raise again before you actually start drilling.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Which, as I say, we knew that going in. That's yeah.
What are you budgeting for G&A for the next 12 months?
I mean, the regular G&A is pretty low. It's only about $40,000 a month. But and then marketing is somewhat seasonal, and this is the high season right now for that. But then most conferences are actually finished now, but and most things are prepaid anyways, so it's really just travel expenses. So there's not too much left in the budget for that. And then going into next year, it's not too significant. For the first couple of quarters, so we're really going to be focusing more on the field work going forward for the next 6 to 8 months.
How much money would you need for all that work, based on what you've seen so far? Yeah, how much money do you need for drilling?
For drilling, well, a lot depends on the response from the environmental ministry, and we're literally expecting that any day now. In fact, I'd hoped to have received a letter earlier this week, because what we've done there is that we approached the environmental ministry, which is called Semarnat in Mexico, to kind of introduce them to the concept where we wanted to start with underground drilling, knowing full well that surface drilling is going to require permitting. But we felt that underground drilling would not, because we are dealing with a site that was in production before, so it's a disturbed site, if you like. The plant is there. There are existing roads, and that sort of thing. And so, essentially, a small underground drill would be brought in on the back of a flatbed truck, down existing roads, unloaded at the mine opening. The guys carry the equipment into the mine, reassemble it, and all you need is a small tank out front for water, and a generator for a bit of power supply and some diesel, and there is no environmental impact. So, our pitch to them was that underground drilling should not require a permit, and it typically doesn't if you're working with an operating mine or anything like that. But if you're in that circumstance, then you already have an overriding environmental permit anyways, and then so that the underground comes almost as a like an afterthought, or not the first thing that you do. So it's a little bit unusual, I think, for a company to start with underground drilling, but we just felt that under our circumstances, and given that we do have underground access right into the guts of the mineralization, and we've taken probably in excess of 800 samples underground now, so we have a fairly good idea as to what's mineralized and what's not. So if we can set up a small drill underground and drill off the mineralization at fairly close spacing, then we can get a much better idea of what we'll be mining. And so it's really, a program like that is not exploration drilling, it's really delineation drilling, because we'll just be drilling fans of holes that will be, maybe like 10, maybe 12 and a half meters apart, and as we just move through the mineralized zone. So it will give us a very good idea of what we're going to be mining, and as such, the holes will be relatively short, probably 20 to 25 meters each, and consequently, the total program for all three mines is likely to be less than 2,000 meters. So, if we're budgeting maybe $100,000 or $100 a meter, then you're really only looking at a couple of $100,000. So it won't be hugely expensive for that, but we'll get a tremendous amount of information that will be critical for us to put together a preliminary mine plan, and in conjunction with the metallurgical work we're doing, putting together a more detailed flow sheet and cost analysis of rebuilding the plant and so on. So there's a lot of moving parts, a lot going into this, but it's moving along quite quickly, and we're very pleased with the progress so far.
What does that mean in terms of timing, though? Again, and kind of thinking about, well, generally the size of the raise that you maybe are thinking here is then potentially not going to be much larger than what you just did. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's I think a fair statement. We're still cognizant of the share price and dilution and that sort of thing. So I would rather raise money in smaller increments more frequently rather than go out and try to raise $5 or $10 million at 10 cents. That would be hugely dilutive for shareholders, and so we'll probably we'll see what kind of feedback we get when we talk to people once we decide on timing and terms and that sort of thing. But yeah, it probably won't be too much larger than the one we've just done.
Talk to me a little bit more about that and how you decided to go for this choice there, because and I guess that's kind of the internal battle that juniors have to fight forever. But it's like, do you raise a lot of money and then go and do a big aggressive program, or do you and then on the back of that potentially have results that push your price higher and then grow the company that way, or do you grow it with being very, very cognizant of dilution and not doing too big of raises? Yeah, how did you make that decision for yourself, and how should a decision like that be made in the first place?
Well, I think the key thing from our standpoint is that our business model is somewhat different. I won't say it's unique because there are others doing it, but we're not a standard exploration company that's out looking to build a huge resource and need to fund a 10,000 meter program. As I mentioned, a 2,000 meter underground program is relatively inexpensive, and a lot of the other work that we're currently doing is also relatively inexpensive compared to a large drill program. And until we get to the point where we can actually pull the trigger on a plant rebuild, which will be, about $2 million US for that, plus, about $1 million for the underground rehabilitation. And we hope to be able to finance that through an advance on an offtake agreement with Metal Trader. So I'm hoping that we can do that without going back to the market. So everything we're doing now is just somewhat preliminary. And so, I mean, if you just look at what's happened this year since starting this project, we did a kind of a concurrent financing, if you want to call it that, when we acquired the project at the end of February, and that was at 4 cents. And because we were trading under 5 cents, we were restricted by the exchange as to how much we could raise. And the 800,000 that we did raise was the maximum that they were going to allow us to raise at that time. But by the time we got to August, we raised that 1.7 million you mentioned at 6 cents, and then by October, before the 4-month hold come off, we were already trading up to 14, and shareholders were very happy at that point. Now we've all seen a bit of a correction, across the board in this last couple of weeks. So we've come back down to about 10 cents, but I'm hoping to get the share price back up a little bit. So by doing this sort of incrementally, we have actually decreased the dilution, rather than if we had tried to, raise several $1 million at 4 cents or even, at 6 cents for that matter. So by moving the share price up and even just doing the same amount, if we can just do 2 million at a time, for example, but every 5 or 10 cents, then it's less dilutive to do it that way. And if you can show progress on the project and show some decent momentum, then that helps to increase the share price, and it also helps to do the financing, because you're demonstrating to shareholders and potential investors that you're actually doing what you said you would do.
Mm-hmm. What are you thinking in terms of timing then? When would you want to be drilling? I suppose that's going to tell us a little bit more about when you think you might have to tap the market. So yeah, when do you want to be drilling?
Well, I think a lot will depend on this response from the authorities as to whether they will allow us to start with the underground drilling, and if so, if there are any conditions or restrictions associated with that. But in an ideal world, if they said, yeah, we can go ahead and there's nothing, no major restrictions, then the next step would be to get a mining contractor in there and start a bit of rehabilitation work to open up some of the spaces that we need decide where we'll be drilling from for drill stations, and then to secure those areas, make sure that they're safe for the workers. Probably doing a bit of rock bolting, screening, and so on. So we'll have to get a better sense of timing and costs from the mining contractor to do that work. So that's going to take at least until Christmas, and which really, when you think about it, we're almost midway through November already, so that's not that far off. And in Mexico, around about the middle of December, things start to slow down or shut down, and and they don't really pick up again until almost mid-January. So we really only have about a month now to try and get some of that work done. And so I think realistically, if there are people and equipment available, they'll get underway with it, but I suspect they won't finish it before Christmas. So that work will continue on into January, and then once we're happy that the underground work or the underground conditions are safe enough to bring the drillers in, then we would start with the drilling program. So certainly not before January, and it may even move into February for the start of the drilling.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's a good window for raising capital? Again, as you mentioned, things kind of start to slow down December. They might ramp up kind of around late January, but is that not too late? Because essentially you don't want to be raising capital exactly to the day when you need it. So what's a good window for you to do that?
Well, I would say traditionally, December is typically not a good time to be raising money, because that's usually tax loss season and so on. And but the way things have gone this year, the way everything's picked up, I don't know that we're going to see as much tax loss selling this year. And from the feedback that we've been getting at the conferences we've been attending, there is a recognition from potential investors that a lot of the stocks are still quite undervalued, ours included, and so there is definitely interest in participating in a financing even now or in the next few weeks. So we'll be gauging that along with the development of the project, because there are a couple of things you can. You have to be careful in terms of not waiting too long. To use an old expression, you strike while the iron's hot, and if there's interest now, then even though he might not need the money for a couple of months, maybe we just raise the money now, rather than wait until the new year. And then, by that time, you go back to the people that had expressed an interest, and they'll say, "Oh, well, yeah, I would have, but I've just invested in 3 other companies in the meantime." So you're always trying to balance those types of things, and just constantly communicating with interested parties, and then just decide. And part of it's just watching the market too, market timing, metal prices, things like that, because market sentiment, as you well know, is very, very significant, for the juniors and for market timing and raising money and so on. So we're monitoring that on a regular basis, and and watching the share price too, of course. Because as I say, I'd like to do it at a higher price, but I can't control the market, so we'll just we'll see how things play out over the next few weeks.
So the timing is largely dependent on government and the Mexican government and how you choose to raise capital, essentially. Is it in any part also dependent on the local communities? Have you engaged with them? Are they happy with you doing the drilling, or what does that look like?
Yeah, there's no issues as far as that goes. The local communities are very small, and they're right now. We're the largest employer in the local community. we kind of joke about it because we've only hired 6 people, but that has made us the largest employers. I mean, there were no jobs there previously at all, so we've got some young guys working there, and a young lady that cooks and cleans for everybody at the house we're renting, and that sort of thing. So it's a fairly remote area, and they're quite happy to have us there, and providing the jobs and the economic benefits for them.
Mm-hmm. Is water in any case a concern for you, or where would the water come from for your drilling program? Do you need any specific permits for that?
You do need a water license, and we're just in the process of doing that right now. And in that particular area, and throughout a large part of Mexico, depending on what watershed you're in, the government's just not granting any new licenses, and so we'll have to buy an existing license, and we're just going through that now. We've researched who owns the licenses for that area, and then we'll get it down to a short list, and start approaching people and just arrange to buy one. So, I mean, the water is available. There's a river immediately below the project, but yeah, it's just we have to go through that process. But in the short term, what we have been doing is that because the old plant is there, and it's a vat leach plant, the guys have cleaned out the tanks and have been collecting rainwater through the rainy season, and so now we have about 700,000 liters of water in those tanks that is available for drilling. That will certainly get us off to a good start, with the drilling as far as that goes. So that certainly buys us some time to get everything else in place.
Mm-hmm. Why I'm asking that is because I'm thinking about competing, competing demands on water and stuff like that. So when you actually go there and require drill pads or drill, how would that work actually for you? Would you have to go and require drill pads? Is it drill locations? What would you have to permit once you actually want to drill above ground?
Above ground, yeah, you'd have to permit the specific drill locations typically, and I mean the government does allow you some flexibility, particularly in an area like ours, where, as I mentioned, it's a disturbed site already. We'll try to drill from roads or close to roads to minimize any environmental disturbance anyway. Do what we can in that regard, but yeah. So I mean, it's just two different things. So I mean, you've got the environmental permits to do that, to set up the pad and do the actual drilling. But then, as I say, the water license is completely separate. But once you have a water license for the project, then it doesn't really matter where you are on the project. As far as that goes, you can draw the water for use anywhere on the project.
Mm-hmm. Good. How many pads do you think you might need once you actually, go above ground?
Surface, well, we're still just putting that together because, as we released recently, the surface work that the guys have been doing, they've identified a parallel vein that's, about 200 meters away from the main vein. And there are, a few old workings on that they've cleaned out and sampled, and a few old trenches that they've also cleaned out and sampled. And now they're working on another vein right now. Excuse me, that is not parallel to the first two. It actually goes off at an angle. So presumably it probably intersects one or both of the others, and those intersection points can always be a target for for mineralization from a geological standpoint. So, but there's a limited amount of exposure at surface. So as the point of all that is, we're still defining targets on surface, and that will continue for the next several months. So we're still putting all that together, and we do have a bit of time as far as the surface drilling goes. So we haven't really firmed up the program yet, but you might say we've defined the main vein for 1,600 meters along strike, and we'll be drilling the parallel veins, the other veins as well. So even if you drill, every 100 meters, which we would probably do that just to start, then you're looking at about 15, 16 drill pads just to begin with, and then if you throw in the parallel veins and so on, so probably more than 20 sites overall.
Mm-hmm. I didn't actually want to talk about what you're going to be drilling eventually once you get out there, because you had an interesting news release on September 24th about finding a new vein at El Potrero. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that, or start there. How does a newly mapped vein change target ranking for you, or whatever you want to drill?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I was referring to a minute ago, because that's the one that's about 200 meters away. It's parallel to the main Dos de Mayo, and but one of the key things is that it's at surface. You're on the side of a mountain, so there's a bit of a slope there, and one of the key things about these low sulfidation epithermal systems is that there's typically a limited vertical range of mineralization. It's what we like to talk about geologically as being the boiling zone, where as the fluids were injected up from the source below, and then they hit a particular set of pressure temperature conditions that precipitates the mineralization out of solution, and with these types of systems, that typically occurs within about typically a 200 to 300 meter vertical extent, and these veins can be very extensive horizontally, and they can go for kilometers, but not vertically. So it's not like working in Canada, for example, in the Canadian Shield, where the vertical extent will be your greatest dimension. These deposits go for thousands of meters sometimes, and very, very extensive vertically, but without necessarily a huge horizontal or lateral extent. Whereas it's the opposite with these epithermal systems. So they have a large lateral extent, but not vertical. And so with this parallel vein, what we're seeing is that we're on the side of a hill, a mountain, and where it's exposed on surface is at a higher elevation than the surface expression of the Dos de Mayo vein. And so the fact that it's exposed at surface at a higher elevation tells us that there could be, it's about 100 meters higher than the surface expression of Dos de Mayo, and then Dos de Mayo, you're going another at least 50 meters, below into the underground workings. So there's a very good chance that we'll be looking at, maybe 150 meters at least of vertical extent below the surface expression of El Capulin. So that will have to be tested from surface, because we don't have the underground access to that. And so that has really added to to our surface targets, and it's fairly high priority because it is mineralized at surface, and it's immediately upslope from the mineralization from the three historic mines on Dos de Mayo. So it's a very good location, and so that those that will be a high priority target for sure. But we haven't quite finalized that yet in terms of specific targets and number of holes holes and footage and that sort of thing. We have several months to do that still, and the guys are still working on it. But yeah, I think to a bit of a long-winded answer to your question, but the surface work that the guys are doing is changing the targeting and the priorities for us, and it's as we get a better understanding of the overall mineralizing system that we're actually dealing with there.
Well, I like the long-winded answer, and I like it when it's detailed. What's a geological model controlling the what you call the high-grade clavos and the
Right.
boiling zone, I guess, at Dos de Mayo and Pinos Cuates?
Right. That the location of the boiling zone is always a subject of great debate. That all of these deposits, the general thought is that there's some kind of an intrusive body at depth that provides the heat source and probably the fluids and the metal content to begin with, but it percolates upwards through typically the volcanics, the andesites of the lower volcanic series, and but it percolates up through structures, through cracks in the rock. And so these types of deposits are always structurally controlled. And really any vein deposit is structurally controlled, regardless of whether it's orogenic or epithermal or whatever it is. That's why you can trace these things for kilometers along strike or at depth. You're basically tracing the structures that the veins now occupy. In doing that, we do know that there are some intrusive rocks not too far below us. And we know that because of the topography, and there are cuts through the rock and through the stratigraphy. Our guys haven't quite got to doing much mapping or sampling on those rocks yet, but we will get to that, and that will help with our overall understanding of the system. But it's also possible that we'll find other veins, other mineralized bodies, that sort of thing related to these intrusive bodies. And regarding the clavos that you mentioned, which is the Spanish term for an ore shoot or a mineralized shoot, they tend to occur where there's sometimes a flexure in the overall structure, or some way that it's open. The structure has opened up, and the fluids have come up into that opening and formed one of these shoots. And you can also get these things can be how could I put it? Sort of not quite sausage shape, but they'll pinch and swell, but they'll have maybe a vertical or subvertical vertical extent to them. And it's not uncommon that the lateral extent might only be 30 to 50 meters, but they'll probably extend through that entire vertical extent of the boiling zone, of the mineralized horizon. So they could be 150, 200, maybe 300 meters in vertical extent, but only 30 to 50 horizontally. And so they'll pinch and swell, and you get those as the structure moves around, because these things are never knife sharp and straight and flat, like a piece of paper or something like that. They're always bending and twisting, and because the host rocks are all getting shattered and broken up, and so the veins will just follow whatever cracks in the rock are there.
It's kind of funny when you're basically targeting all my follow-up questions. So maybe I need a different job, or maybe you want to take away my job here, which would be funny. But how deep do you think it goes, though? I mean, what's kind of reasonable to expect? And they might be thinning out, or like kind of pitch and swell, as you said. But how deep would you have to test it?
Well, we'll find that out once we get to the drilling. But one thing to keep in mind is that you can get, with these parallel systems, you can have different phases of mineralization, and with each phase, it can have its own boiling zone, because each phase could be separated by millions of years, it's these things are, in geological terms, they're quite far apart, and so they would have different conditions. And so what you can sometimes see is that on one vein, it might have it might just pinch out and stop at a particular elevation. But then on a parallel one, because it came in at a different time under slightly different conditions, it might actually go deeper, or it might be higher. Or if it's close enough, they can telescope and they can overlap one another, and that can have an impact on the mineralization as well. So they can be quite complex systems at times, and we always like to think in geological terms that the more complex they are, the better. They're obviously harder to mine and to figure out, but if you have a very complex system, it's more likely to be larger and more extensive. If you have a single pulse on a single structure, it's less likely to have a lot of size potential. If it's just one event, just bang, there you're done. But if it's a long-lived system, then that's where size can come into play. So that's where I'm really encouraged to see these parallel veins and even splay veins, and that they're also mineralized. And if we can find where they actually intersect, the intersection. If you think back to your, I don't know, what would that be? Physics, I suppose. The intersection of two planes is a line. So, when you get two veins coming together like that, it tends to form a linear ore shoot at that intersection. And those areas are often wider and sometimes richer in mineralization as well. So those are primary targets once you start to figure out the structure on these systems.
Mm-hmm. Is that in any way related to the fact that El Capulin assays that you mentioned here, they're more consistent than Dos de Mayo, or how is that reflected in kind of domain boundaries here, I suppose?
Yeah, so I mean that in itself was quite encouraging, because the style of mineralization at El Capulin is a little different. The vein there, it's more consistent, and just banded quartz calcite, adularia, and mineralization, but the Dos de Mayo is a breccia vein, so it has very different geological characteristics, and that tells me that it's quite likely that they were emplaced at different times, which comes back to what I said a minute ago about different phases of mineralization, and the fact that they're both mineralized is very encouraging, because if you're having multiple phases of mineralization coming in, then that really increases the overall potential, for the system. So seeing that at El Capulin, I mean, from a mining standpoint and a processing standpoint, the mining engineers and the plant guys they like to see that consistency. It makes their job a whole lot easier if your head grades are more consistent on a daily basis. Whereas within the breccia vein, and we've seen that with some of the assays we've been getting in the three mines there, there can be a lot more variability, and we do see some nugget effect in the gold. And this silver, in places it can be more consistent, but we're also perhaps, and we need more sampling to be sure, but early indications are that there may be a bit of vertical zonation with the silver, with higher grades closer to surface are going as you go up in the system. So these are all things that we have to figure out, because depending on where you're drawing your mineralization from to feed the plant, you want your grades to be as consistent as possible in order to keep your recoveries consistent, because if you're drawing from different areas of the mine and you've got one high grade pocket that's very high grades, and you're sending that to the plant at the same time as another area that's relatively low grade, then that's going to sort of mess up your metallurgy at the plant, and could impact the overall recoveries. So if you have that kind of a situation, what you might end up doing is just batching the processing. So you would mine the high grade area and just stockpile the ore, and then do the same for the low grade material, and then decide how to either blend it or just process them entirely separately, and tweak the metallurgy accordingly.
With all that, what is the total mapped and mineralized strike length that you consider drill ready today, or understood, with the emphasis falling on the latter part of that question? Because you say, again, 1,600 meters of map trace essentially, but how much of that has a sort of grade control data or structural thesis telling you exactly where to go and sink those rigs?
Yeah, where we focused so far is the area around the existing mines, and the parallel veins in that same area. So I would say that's the main focus. It's about 500 meter strike length, and now with parallel veins within that, and the one new one that we're just sampling right now, we don't really have much information on it yet. So we don't have any results. I can't speak to grades or anything like that. But that's outside that area again, and so there's probably a width of, I'd say, 300 to maybe 400 meters, and then about 500 meters along strike. So that's a kind of a box area, if you like, about 400 by 500. And so that's the primary target area. Anything else along strike from there, we really don't have a lot of information on. It's just there's no underground workings along that stretch, and that we've seen anyways, and just a few trenches here and there, a little bit of outcrop. So we're sort of connecting the dots to be able to trace it out for the 1,600 meters. But we will drill it at a fairly wide spacing to begin with. But it's really that 500 meters that we'll be focusing on at the beginning.
What is the drilling density that you think is enough before you can actually try to get into production here, because of specifically low epithermal systems, that part of Mexico, pinch and swell, and so on and so forth? So you probably need tighter, tight drill spacing. What are you thinking that is?
Well, as I say, we'll be focusing on that initial 500 meters, and the underground drilling will tell us a lot. I mean, the spacing there, the way that it's been set up, excuse me, the guys set up a 25 meter grid, and we'll probably cut that in half for the initial underground drilling. So we'll be drilling at 12.5 meter centers, and drilling fans of holes that you'd have a vertical hole, one at about 45 degrees, another one horizontal, another one about 45 up, and that's the nice thing about being underground. You can do that. You can drill horizontal holes and up holes, as we call them. But they'll be relatively short, as I mentioned. So you can get, 4 of those holes if they're all 25 meters. So there's only 100 meters, and you've got four holes right into the guts of the system. And then you move over 12.5 meters and do the same thing again. So we'll have a series of those in each of the mines, and that will give us a much better understanding. And then we'll have some step out holes from there. So maybe if it looks like the individual clavos are pinching out, then maybe you go to a 25 meter center as you step out from there. And then if you find another one, then you tighten it up back up to 12.5 meters again. So, and just sort of take that approach, because there is spacing, or there's space between the old mines where there's effectively no information at all. So the old timers would have focused on those clavos that they knew about, but they're going to be 200 meters apart, with very little known about the area in between. But the underground workings don't connect between the three mines. And so those areas between the mines will have to be drilled from surface.
Do you think it might need different mining methods across the different domains, the ones that don't connect?
I doubt it. Just on these types of systems, typically you would use cut and fill. Would be the main method. But it depends. With the breccia vein, it's a little bit different in that we know that the vein itself can be up to 10 meters wide in spots. It does, get to a decent width. What we don't really know is how much of that 10 meters is consistently mineralized, or if sometimes the mineralization can be along one contact with the wall rock, or it can be on the other contact, and it can be a little bit inconsistent at times. So that's where the close space drilling comes into play to really figure that out. So if there may be places where we could move to long hole mining, which would be cheaper, but yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. Once we've completed the initial underground drilling.
Does any of that influence your desired timeline for production restart, though? And I suppose desire, I mean, it's one thing wanting something, and then it's another thing actually getting it, because there's a lot of moving parts involved. But I mean, last time we spoke, I asked you how long do you think it'll take you to get into production, which is the main plan here. You said 2 to 3 years, and you said $2 to $3 million as well. Is it still a reasonable expectation on both ends?
Yes, it is.
So that's a short answer. I was actually hoping for more. Now you're going to make me work harder this time.
Well, I mean, it's in terms of specifics. The biggest in terms of the time frame, the biggest wild card really is the permitting. The actual rebuild itself is probably 6 to 8 months. It's really not going to take all that long. The rehabilitation of the underground workings can probably start before the plant rebuild, because the permit requirements, for doing that underground work will be less restrictive, if at all. So we can get going on that work sooner. And then beyond that, some of the other things we've already started to look into power supply. The existing power line ends about 3 kilometers straight line distance. But we've looked at the topography and where the road goes, and we'll probably have to extend it for, there's a couple of options, but somewhere, let's say, between 4.5 to 5 kilometers is really all we have to extend it for. And so we've already initiated those discussions with the Federal Electrical Commission, and we'll get a contractor involved to give us some costs and that sort of thing. So some of that will also require permitting, because if you're putting out a power line, obviously you're having to clear an area to put in the poles and the right of way for the power line and that sort of thing. So there will be some permitting associated with that. And so these are all things that we're working on currently. But the whole permitting aspect is something that we don't really have a lot of control over. We can provide the ministry or various ministries, there's not just one, with whatever information they require, but there's always a lot of back and forth. They're always going to come back to you and say, well, we need this, we need that, and do you have a map of such and such? And so it's a bit of an iterative process that goes on for typically some months. There are other things like, an explosives permit, for example, in Mexico has to be acquired from the military. And, that can take easily 6 months, to get that. But in the interim, you can bring in, and that's, I should say that's in order to keep explosives on site, for your day-to-day operations. In the meantime, just to do even the work that we're about to engage in to prepare for the underground drilling, we can bring in a mining contractor who has an explosives permit, but he would just have to bring the explosives in, use whatever he needs that particular day, and then whatever he doesn't use, he takes it off site at the end of the day, and so it just has to be properly controlled, and in order to keep working like that. So it is possible to to get started with that sort of thing before we have our own explosives permit. So there's a whole bunch of moving parts, as you say, but a lot of it can be we're working it in parallel. But in terms of the time frame, I still think the 2 to 3 years is realistic. So perhaps sometime, given that we're mid-November, perhaps sometime in 2027. But if not, it may spill over into early 28.
Mm-hmm. Metallurgy is, of course, part of that process as well that you're going to have to figure out, that you have been figuring out. You've done some recently as well. What are the recoveries that you're showing again, and what kind of residence time are you hoping for?
Well, what we received was certainly as good as we might have hoped for. An average of 95%. On gold recovery from leaching, and that was it was really encouraging. I was really pleased with that, and the silver was lower and more variable, which is not a surprise. We know that there's free gold in the system. There's visible gold. I've seen it myself, and so when you have free gold, it does tend to to go into solution easier, and it's not locked up in some other minerals or whatever. So one might expect to get higher and more consistent gold recoveries. The silver, on the other hand, doesn't usually occur as native silver. It's usually locked up in some other minerals, like silver sulfides, like argentite, acanthite, that sort of thing, tetrahedrites, and maybe silver sulfosalts, or it's locked up with gold in electrum. And so depending on how and where those minerals occur, that is going to impact your recoveries, especially just on leaching. I mean, silver typically doesn't leach as well as gold anyways, and you can see that at most silver gold deposits around the world, certainly in the Sierra Madre. So we would expect the silver results to be lower, but the fact that we did get, one of the 3 samples was 76% recovery on the silver, so that was quite encouraging. The lowest one was, I think, 41%. So there was quite a range, which speaks to that mineralogical variation that I was just talking about. So we'll have to take a closer look at that. We will be doing some mineralogical work coming up. In fact, I just had a call this morning with our project manager and one of our directors, who's a metallurgical engineer, and so they're overseeing that program. But we will be sending some samples for mineralogical testing to see exactly what the silver mineralogy is, and how we can best approach that from a metallurgical standpoint to increase those recoveries.
What about arsenic, bismuth, mercury, anything else in terms of nasties in there?
No, nothing at all, and no base metals either. There's no copper, lead, zinc, and it's just straight gold and silver, which is terrific. It's once we leach it, it goes through a Merrill-Crowe circuit, so we just produce a precipitate, and that's it. We would probably ship the precipitate off-site and have it refined elsewhere, or produce a doré bar first and then refine it.
That's actually interesting, because you did also run gravity testing. You're showing 76% gold recovery in gravity, yes, alone. Does that, because
That's
that makes me think whether it changes your final product strategy. Like, does it necessarily have to be Dore, or yeah, what does that tell you?
so the gravity is something that was not built into the existing plant, so they didn't do that before. And on these first tests, we ran the gravity completely separate from the leaching, whereas in practice, and we did that to really get a better understanding of how well each one was working. But in practice, what you would normally do is that you would run everything through the gravity circuit first. And if I shouldn't say if, we know that there's free gold there, so you're going to recover some of that through the gravity circuit. So you extract the gravity concentrates, and then the tails from the gravity circuit is what goes to the leaching circuit, and then you would recover what you can from that. So that and this is again what we were just discussing this morning, that will be part of the next round of testing that we do, is to run all of that in series, where you run everything through gravity first, and then the tails go to leaching, and then so you look at how much you recover from each of those, and then you add those two together and subtract from the as a portion of the head grade to determine what your overall recoveries are. And so this is all part of the back and forth, and metallurgy is very much an iterative process as well at these early stages as you try different things.
Mm-hmm. Do you have to do variability testing across the domains though? Because these were like 25 kilograms of samples, I believe, that you did. So I wonder, how representative that is about variability of the metallurgy across the domains, or how much more testing would you like to see?
We'll have several other rounds of testing because I mean, one of the things that we discovered just from those three samples is that when the guys went back in to take those, and we needed, for the metallurgical test, we needed about 25 kilograms for each sample, and so they were instructed to go back into the mineralized zone, back to areas where they had channel sampled before, and take a low grade sample, a medium grade, and a high grade, and that's based on the assays from the channel samples. So they went right back to those specific areas, and channel samples might typically be say, well, on average about 2 kilograms, and so then you're going back to that same spot and taking a 25 kilogram sample, so much larger. But what we found was that there was a fair bit of variability in the gold grades between the channel samples and the corresponding metallurgical sample. The silver grades were very consistent, but the gold was not. It was much more variable. So that right away, that tells you that there is a bit of a nugget effect. And for example, the high grade sample, the channel sample that the guys took, I believe, was just over 30 grams gold. But the corresponding metallurgical sample was a little over 17 grams. So about half, of what the channel sample was, and the low grade sample that they took was in the 2 to 3 gram range for the channels, but it was, I think, 5 or 6 grams on the metallurgical sample, so it was twice as high. So that's telling you that there is some variability, in the gold because of this free gold and the nugget effect that creates. So in that sense, to determine what's actually representative will require more samples, larger samples, and we'll probably eventually drill some holes that are specifically for metallurgical testing, because then when you're using drill holes to do that, nobody can say that there's any any sort of bias, intentional or otherwise, in terms of the sample that you're collecting. It's on these types of deposits. It's harder to see the mineralization. So it's and the gold is very fine, and so when you're underground and it's dark, you can't usually see the visible gold underground. So it's pretty hard to say that there would be any intentional bias in terms of high grading, if you like. But sometimes that fine grain mineralization is it's almost like dust, or it's in fractures and cracks that it just falls out naturally. So when you bang on the rock, you just get more of that stuff falling down and collecting it, and it's just that's just part of the process. But when you're actually drilling through it and you end up with core, it's more consistent. And so for metallurgical testing, you wouldn't have to split the core the way you do with regular assaying, and you keep half and you send half to the assay lab, that sort of thing. By the time you get to metallurgical drilling, you've already done all of that, and so you just drill a hole and then you send the whole core to the lab, and so you have a much more consistent piece of the vein, and so that in itself tends to be a bit more representative. And by that time you will have figured out how many holes like that you would need, what sort of spacing, what we're also seeing is, from the results that we've received so far from the channel sampling underground, the Pinos Quartis mine is higher grade than the other two. And that may be just a function of exposure. Where the vein was exposed underground, we might find that as we open it up, the grades are a little bit more variable. But from what we know and what we've seen so far, Pinos Quartis is a little bit higher grade. So in that sense, it may not be necessarily representative of the whole system. And so, going back to what I was saying earlier about, mining these things individually and then, making a decision as to do you blend them and try to get a consistent grade going to the plant, or do you stockpile them individually, high grade, low grade, medium grade, that sort of thing, and then you batch process them and tweak the metallurgy accordingly in order to to keep your recoveries as high as you can. So yeah.
How fine of a grind size would you need, though, in the end?
That's also something that will come out of the testing. What they used on this first one was 53 microns, which is quite fine. But part of the reason for doing that is that it's once you know that and you see what kind of recoveries you get. You can't, once you've leached the sample, you can't send it back and grind it again. So you just and if you don't grind it fine enough to begin with, then you just might not get those sort of recoveries that you were looking for. So on the next pass, we might not grind it quite that fine, but these are all part of the tests that you would run. So we'll find what the optimum grind size is, and it may also be a function of the veins as well. The breccia vein will likely be different than just the straight banded quartz veins that we see at Capulin, for example, because quartz is going to be harder, and you might need to grind it longer or finer, whereas the breccia vein, maybe it's going to be broken up more. There's quartz fragments within a matrix, but then what we're seeing is that often the better grades are associated with areas where the matrix itself is silicified, and so that the overall hardness of the veins is going to vary, from one spot to another. So these are all things where the geology starts to interplay with the processing side.
Hmm. When you account for the recoveries and everything else that we've talked about so far, Bob, and this very forward looking and speculative and so on. But if you get into production, I suppose what we're supposed to say here, but would the majority of the revenue be made up by silver or gold, or what kind of split are you thinking about?
The majority will be gold on this project, from what we know right now. Now, I mean, having said that, that can change across a property or between veins, even. I've seen that in the past. At the Guanajuato mine, for example, that we were mining with Great Panther. That was primarily a silver mine. Well, I mean, it was silver and gold, but silver was dominant through most of it. But then the fellow, actually, the fellow who just hired as project manager, he was the mine manager there at the time, Carlos Castro, and he actually put a small crosscut out from where they were working, out about just 10, 15 meters, I think, and intersected a vein that they had been mining higher up and had pinched out, but then it opened up again, and that Margarita vein was about, I think we averaged about 5 grams gold, which was quite a bit higher than what the other veins were being mined at. So these things can change from vein to vein, and but right now, from what we know, El Potrero is looking about, I would say, by value, about 80-20, maybe 70-30 in places. So, I mean, you could always, let's just say 75-25 or something on average, somewhere in that sort of ballpark in terms of gold to silver. And so that's where, it's really encouraging, obviously, from a recovery standpoint. If we're getting 95% recovery on the gold, if that's the primary moneymaker, if you like, then that's obviously better than if it was for silver.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about eventually when you like if you end up making doré bars, is Durango and where you are safe enough to have doré on site and then export it?
I don't know that I'd want to take that risk. It's um, this deposit is different than the four producing mines surrounding us. They're all silver, lead, zinc mines with variable amounts of gold. So they're polymetallic. They run a flotation system for the most part, and produce concentrates. And we won't be doing that. As such, I just don't want to take that risk. If you like, I don't want to um, have a target on us, to stand out from the rest, so to speak. And it may be fine, but yeah. Well, I mean, we'll cross that bridge when we get there in a little while. But yeah, there's sometimes there's just no point, drawing attention to yourself, and if just taking the safer route. And I mean, everything will be insured anyways, so that if anything does happen, then we'll be covered for it. So I mean, people can rest assured that that'll be the case. There should be no major impact financially to the company, but nonetheless, it's not something that you want to see happen, and especially if it's something that you can avoid going in.
Yeah. How's safety been for you so far, and the 6 people that you employ on site?
Yeah, it hasn't been an issue, and as you're aware, we're only 13 kilometers from the Topia mine, which was the first one that I acquired with Great Panther, going back to 2004. So the first time I went into Topia was in 2003, and it was just a sleepy little town at that point. Mine wasn't operating, there were no jobs, and the town was maybe 3,000 people. Whereas now, we put the mine back in production in 2006, and it's still going, owned and operated by Guanajuato Silver now. But the town has tripled in size. It's over 9,000 people now. And to the best of my knowledge, through all of that time that Great Panther was operating it, and then subsequently with Guanajuato Silver over the last few years, there has never been an issue, as far as security goes, to the best of my knowledge. Other than, I mean, any operation, you're going to get petty theft and stuff like that, and occasionally some rogue guys might hijack a truck. I think everybody's had a truck of concentrate taken, one time or another. But those are usually one-off type situations, and there's never been an issue to my knowledge. And as far as the locals go, I mean, they just want the jobs. It's all about the economic impact. And so I think as long as we maintain a positive relationship, and 100% of our people in Mexico are Mexican, these they integrate themselves well into the local communities, and people get along well, and I mean, it's nice being in that same area, because we do use Topia as a staging ground. That's the closest airstrip, so we fly into there. There's a hotel there. There's restaurants and supplies and mining contractors and equipment, and that we can draw on. And so we're already looking at bringing people from Topia, even, not just the local communities where the project is. And we always maintained a good, strong relationship with the Topia community in the years that Great Panther was operating there. And so we have a good base, I guess you could say, to work from, such that when our guys go back there, or even me personally, I don't have any concerns, walking around town, or going into stores, restaurants, or whatever, and there are still remnants of Great Panther in town. The logo is still there on display in places, and so our guys can go talk to the mayor or whomever. So we have that relationship to build on, and it's all very positive. And hopefully we can just well, not hopefully, but our intention is to keep that going.
Mm-hmm. Are you doing any work at La Dura anytime soon?
La Dura?
Yes.
So the third of the three mines. We have been. We've been sampling both underground and surface. And there's the main La Dura working, and then there are two other small ones just above that. Excuse me. So we're just actually compiling all of that information now. And that's something I'd like to get those results out in the not too distant future. So probably within the next few weeks, we'll have those results out as well.
What do you think is the biggest challenge for Pinnacle from now on out? I mean, we talked about, I think, pretty much everything that I could think of, at least for now. What's the biggest challenge? Is it the government? Is it something else? What keeps you up at night, I suppose?
Well, to be honest, nothing really keeps me up at night. I sleep well, but no, it's I think the way the markets have been these last few years, and having been in this industry for 45 years now, and having lived through several cycles, that's one of the key things that I mean, I'm not a worrier, so I don't worry about it, but certainly very cognizant of it, and very aware, because it's something that we just can't control, and market sentiment and so on. So it's always a case of where's the next round of funding going to come from? What's the price going to be? How much dilution do we have to take? Those kinds of things. And so that's, I mean, for me, maybe in part because, I don't I don't come from the capital markets side of the business. I'm not an exploration geologist by training, and so I come from the technical side, and the company building side, so I'm quite confident in our ability to execute on that side of things. And we're rebuilding the team, as you know, and I'm bringing together folks that used to work for me at Great Panther, and Carlos was our mine manager. He worked for me for 7 years, and he was the best mine manager that I've ever worked with. And Jorge Ortega was our exploration manager at Great Panther as well. So we brought him back, and we've got one of our mine geologists working there. And as the need arises, Carlos will bring in guys, plant superintendent and mining engineers and mine superintendents and so on. So we'll gradually rebuild that team. So I'm very comfortable being able to execute on all of that. As I've mentioned, the permitting is a bit of a wild card because we just don't have really any control over it. We can certainly work with the various ministries and provide them with whatever information they require. And I am confident because this is it is a disturbed site. It's been in production before. It's relatively small. It's underground. It's not open pit. And so all of those things are working in our favor. So I think we will get through it, but it's difficult to put a time frame on it. That's something that we just can't control. So honestly, I think that's those are the key things. And then, I guess realistically, from a geological standpoint, just, we do have a good understanding in general terms of how these systems, what they look like and how they work. But it's just, proof is in the pudding, as they say. And, you just have to get in there. You got to do the work. You got to do the drilling and test your theories and then just follow through on all of that and just build up that inventory. I can't really use the word resource, and we're not going to define a resource. We're not going to do the 43-101 thing and spend a ton of money on drilling and independent evaluations and PEAs and all that kind of thing. We're just going to bootstrap this into production because it's small enough and we have the experience to do it. So that's what we've done in the past, and it's worked well. And so it's just it'll take a little bit of time, but so far it's been working well for us, and I have the confidence in our people that we can execute on what we say we're going to do.
When do you think next time is going to be that you and I are going to be chatting? When are you going to have something bigger to discuss?
Well, one I wouldn't say it's a major thing, but it certainly will help that we haven't mentioned is this the LiDAR survey that we've been planning. That will help with the geological interpretation. But it's I wouldn't call it a milestone or anything like that. But it's just one thing that we'll get going. Hope to be able to announce something on that in the next couple of weeks as well. But it will take several weeks to process the data, interpret it, and so on, and then we'll use that to help with our surface mapping and sampling and so on. So that will be one nice thing to get that. But I think the key things. Just moving forward with the permitting or the exemption from permitting, if you like, for underground drilling, getting started with that. I think once we actually start the underground drilling and get to that point, I think that will be a pretty key milestone. I think once we pull the trigger on that, we'll obviously have a much more detailed plan of how many holes and where they're going to drill and what we expect to find and that sort of thing. So, of course, it always takes weeks to log and sample the core and get it assayed and that sort of thing before you get results back. So, that'll to complete the program and get everything back and interpreted is going to take several months. But so I think just starting that program alone will be fairly significant. And so, if that's the January-February timeframe, by that time, we'll also have made some advancements in terms of, permitting a surface program and perhaps with extending the power line and those types of things. So moving all of those in parallel. So I think that's probably a reasonable expectation, I suppose.
Good. Well, thank you so much for stopping by today. What do you think I'm forgetting to bring up, though? What did you come here hoping to talk about that I've failed to bring up so far?
I think we've covered pretty much everything of significance. I'm very happy with the way things have progressed, given that we've only had this project for just a little over 8 months. We started work on it at the beginning of March, and to see where we're at today and what we've accomplished and where we're headed. And I love the fact that we've been able to start to reassemble the old team. Working with guys that I enjoy working with, and there's a lot of mutual respect there. I trust them, and that in itself to me is really key. And our board, Dave Solari in particular, is getting much more involved because he's a metallurgical engineer. So he's getting more involved in these metallurgical tests and that sort of thing. So it's nice to have, that level of involvement as well. Dave's working on 3 other projects in Mexico, at least, through his consulting company with other junior companies that are building plants in Mexico. And so to have, his experience, coming to bear on all of this is terrific as well. So, just a great team, encouraging project, and moving forward at a great pace. So, just trying to get the word out there so that people appreciate what we're doing and where we're headed. And I guess the one thing, I always try to just sort of remind people, I suppose, because it's difficult to really pin it down, and you don't want to create too many expectations. But just something that we've always said, that El Potrero, because it is small, it's intentionally small because it's affordable and you can fast track it and get to hopefully a cash flow situation sooner rather than later. But in the interim, we're already looking for that next acquisition, such that we can leapfrog, from one project to the next. So Potrero is just a means to an end. It's not a company maker. It's not. I wouldn't even necessarily call it a flagship project, but it's just part of the building blocks. And if we can identify and acquire another, hopefully larger project, and then continue to build from there, then that's what we intend to do, because we're building a company. We're not just advancing a project.
That's actually a good point there. And I did forget to ask you about what's happening in Canada. Any immediate plans to do some work there?
Not immediately. We may next year. We'll see how things go in the markets, and our ability to raise funds and at what price and that sort of thing. But with the focus continuing to be in Mexico, that will be the priority as far as funding goes. And the projects in Canada are 100% owned, so there's no carrying costs or anything like that. And It would be nice to advance them. I love both projects. I've been involved with both of those for, probably about 20 years. I love the potential of both of those. But right now the priority is with Mexico.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you so much for this update, Bob. I am looking forward to sitting down with you sometime in the future. And yeah, thanks again for stopping by today.
My pleasure, Antonio. Thanks very much for the time.
And as always, thanks to everyone for watching Resource Talks. I have a couple of more things to say, though. The fact that this company was interviewed here today does not mean that they're necessarily a good or a bad company. I'm not here to endorse nor attack anyone. I am simply here to ask some questions. If you find that I have failed in asking a question that you would have liked to hear an answer to, which will happen as I'm not an experienced interviewer, please let me know and I will try to correct that mistake in a future interview. As mentioned at the beginning, please understand that mineral exploration and development is an extremely risky business. Losing money is the norm and should be the expectation. This is a very complex sector, and the performance of individual companies typically depends on many different moving particles, including company-specific factors like geology, financing ability, and many others, really, as well as particles that are outside of the company's control, like geopolitics, macroeconomics, commodity prices, and many more, most of which are nearly impossible to fully understand. Moreover, these companies that typically get interviewed on Resource Talks are in the pre-revenue stage, which means they rely on the public markets for the financing of their operations, which could result in shareholder dilution. Furthermore, as a general rule of thumb, you'll be better off understanding that all company communications online, albeit this interview or their website and their presentation and their social media accounts, or even the social media accounts which you thought were your friends and then told you about a stock, everything really that these companies do is intended as marketing. And although I do not make buy or sell recommendations because there is a clear conflict of interest given the nature of my business, many out there do. And you should be aware of that inherent bias and you should be careful out there. That bias is not always going to be clearly disclosed with everyone out there. So it is safer for you anytime you're watching any type of company specific content to approach it with a dose of skepticism and assume that the party telling you about it is biased in at least some shape or form, because there will always be a bias. Again, albeit clear or not. So always ask yourself what the incentive of your counterparty is and never rely on them regardless of their incentives, but instead double check if what they're saying is true, again, by using setterplus.ca. The fact that I have no idea what I'm doing should already be clear to you at this point. I am not saying this to make jokes or laugh with myself. I just simply do not have a long enough track record of consistent investment profits. So I should under no circumstances be considered an authority on anything. Again, although this may sound amusing to you, believe me, it is not amusing and it is not intended as a joke. I'm simply pointing out a fact and warning you not to rely on anything I do or say. Unfortunately, at least to my understanding, nobody out there has any special abilities. The CEOs do not possess any superior knowledge, and they cannot know about what will go up, what will go down, or what will go in circles. Some people even believe that to be rule number one on Wall Street. Nobody really knows. None of us know whether any of the company's activities will result in a success, again, given that we're talking about high-risk activities where most of the times it ends in failure. So unfortunately, try as I may, I won't always catch all red flags or all challenges with the companies. So even if I did ask a few tough questions in here, don't rely on this being all of the tough questions. Again, these are complicated startups with many moving parts, and I am conflicted given the nature of this business. Therefore, I cannot guarantee the quality of anything presented in this video, and you cannot hold me responsible for any losses or damages stemming from the way you decide to use this interview. Viewers, listeners, and readers acknowledge and agree that the information presented herein did not constitute a solicitation or an offer to buy or sell any security or investment or to participate in any trading strategy. Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business strictly disclaim any and all liability for losses and or damages, whether direct, indirect, special, or consequential, or other consequences, however so caused, arising out of any use or reproduction of the content published by Resource Talks or any decision made or action taken in reliance upon it. By consuming this content, all consumers vow to release resource talks and all parties involved in the management of the business from all claims, proceedings, or consequences. This is all to say, I know it's a lot of lawyer talk, but this is all to say that you shouldn't blindly trust me or anybody on the internet, and you should do your own research. Once again, social media is meant for entertainment. It is setterplus.ca where you do your research. That's where you'll find a company's official filings, and I encourage you to read and analyze the Management Information Circular, the financial statements, the Management Discussion and Analysis, and whenever available, the NI 43-101 technical documents. If you don't understand everything in those documents, the chances of you losing money are even higher than they normally are in this space. And as mentioned earlier, the chances of even the best analysts in this sector losing money are extremely high, since this is venture capital and it is not for everybody. I'll leave you with one of Charlie Munger's quotes, which I wish I had listened to more often earlier on, which says, quote, "If you don't understand it, don't do it."